And so that would fall under, you know, how able-bodied I was. And
Seed found.
I'm not convinced that, I guess, teaching people that they grew up under oppression, basically, and that they're kind of stuck in that is the way out of that. Like, don't you think it's probably more useful for people to learn that they have issues that they grew up with, and they're going to be issues forever because life sucks, but maybe they should kind of fight their way out of it rather than change society as a whole? You could just disagree there, but I mean, people have issues. Like, you know, some people are unhealthy. And sometimes I think giving people the knowledge that they can change the way they live and accomplish things regardless of who they are is healthier than teaching kids, oh, you've been born under this, you know, oppression and you're kind of stuck there. Just doesn't seem like a healthy way of battling some of these problems.
Well, I don't think we should ever teach people, especially young people, that they're stuck anywhere. I think it's important, whether you're an advocate for critical race theory or not, to encourage people to be fiercely ambitious, determined, self-actualized, etc. But I don't think that's mutually exclusive to addressing the broader problems. I mean, throughout history, the most ambitious people were usually the ones who rose up to conquer the disadvantages they had to overcome. When we look at history's heroes, you know, sometimes they're people who are uniquely and singly ambitious. There's nothing wrong with that. But whether we're talking about kings and conquerors, warlords or civil rights leaders, you know, scientists and heroes, often there is a simultaneous advocacy for individual achievement and for, you know, a usurping of whatever unfair social order they're trying to fight against. I mean, that's kind of like the big thing, right? When we talk about politics, at least when I do, I'm always thinking, how can we improve upon this? What problems are there that can be fixed? It's that attitude that led to the birth of this country, after all. Complacency would have kept us under, you know, Henry for, I don't know, however, we would be a colony right now, I suppose. Maybe we would have fought them off after World War II. I mean, I don't know, but I'm glad we had the war for our independence, and I'm, you know, glad our founding fathers weren't complacent about that sort of thing. So I guess I would hope to encourage both, but never to encourage, as I think is often overly attributed, but does sometimes exist, a victim mentality. Because it is possible to be a victim of problems, or of circumstance, of oppression, but to not be a victim as a mode of identity. You know, you can be a victor in circumstances of oppression, and that's what I would want to teach, you know. Identify the problem, but overcome. Rise above it. Don't let it diminish your strength.
Okay, agree with you there. Do you think that people who are, I guess, pushing critical race theory, do you think that's the general feeling of people who are trying to teach this, or do you think that they're teaching this underlying victimhood because they're resentful about something?
I think if we're talking about proper critical race theory at the collegiate level, it would definitely be the, you know, the former, like determined, dedicated. If you take a look at critical race theory scholars, for example, these people are not like quiet or complacent at all. They're quite loud and outspoken in a great many ways. So clearly ambition is on their plate. When it comes to like the stuff people call CRT being taught in elementary and middle school, the issue is a lot of this stuff is just like, let's be real, being taught by like over earnest white progressive Karens, I guess. Like, that's where a lot of it is coming from. Like, hey, listen, no hate, okay? I'm sure many of them are wonderful people, but I've seen some of these lesson plans, and I mean, the way Twitter blows everything up, I don't think this is the norm, but I've seen some where there's usually an overeager white teacher who's like, all right, now we're gonna hand out oppression stickers, and, you know, the black kids get this one, and, you know, if you're disabled, you get this one, so, and now everyone line up, and then there's some white kid at the front of the class, like, ostracized from everyone because he has no stickers, and it's like, you know, stuff like that. I don't think that's conductive to any positive, yeah, so, but I don't consider that critical race theory. I think that weird, cringy, overambitious attempts to address social inequality have kind of been a thing for a while. More attention is being paid to it now, of course.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's impossible for me to know what's going on because, yeah, you know, you hear things on Twitter, like you said, about that kind of thing happening, and that's awful.
It's not good. It's very
not
weird.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about? Do you know? What about critical race theory being taught in corporations? Do you think that's a good use of, you know, time for, let's say, I don't know, engineers?
I mean, like Robin DiAngelo, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess that's pretty adjacent to critical race theory. I don't like Robin DiAngelo at all. Remember what I said about overeager white? It's so first of all, we have to know how this happens, okay? This isn't like SJWs infiltrating corporations. This is overpaid corporate consultants, you know, running through their budgets and thinking, you know, what's the most eye-catching thing I've heard about in the news recently that I can, you know, spend my quarterly budget on within my department. And, you know, Robin DiAngelo is a huge ticket right now because she's controversial, so that tends to be how it goes. I don't think there are, like, CEOs who are, like, pro-critical race theory. I doubt they even know what it means or care. In terms of these lessons, I've seen some of their slideshows where it talks about, like, essentially white deferentialism. There's an attitude on the right that people on the left think that if you're white or a man or cisgender or whatever, you should be sort of complacent or deferential to minority groups. It's an attitude I've never had. I don't think your opinions become more right or wrong based on your race or your sex or anything else like that. And sometimes these how do I put it? It comes off like a kind of performative self-flagellation. You know what I mean? Where people are demonstrating, usually white people, how progressive and woke they are by, you know, making a show of how aware they are of these issues. And this performativity to me has nothing to do with real activism. It's a, you know, it's a sell show. It's what people do to feel good about themselves. In corporations, people should be taught, you know, don't sexually harass people. If you're racist, you know, we'll fire you or whatever. Like, be cool. Yeah. Giving them, like, a big slideshow on, you know, weird sort of watered down version of esoteric legal racial theories is, I don't know how that's really relevant. I just think it's like a hot ticket item right now.
This is kind of a side tangent. Have you heard of ESG scores?
ESG, no, I haven't.
Okay, so ESG scores, I just learned about these. ESG scores stands for Environment Social Governance Scores. Are you looking it up?
Yes, okay, wait, no, I think I have heard of this. Yeah, okay.
So from what I've heard, and I think this should be concerning. From what I've heard, whether or not you teach kind of some of these social issues like critical race theory or, you know, gender studies or some of these things that are getting into corporations with those slideshows, your corporation gets an ESG score, and that enables you to purchase EFTs. So invest in EFTs, or the ETFs, exchange traded funds, ETFs. Yeah?
Yeah.
This is kind of down a rabbit hole. This is kind of down a...
I think I've heard about this. I have problems with it, I think.
Yeah, okay, some of these, I found out about these a couple of weeks ago, and I've been talking about them a bunch because it's kind of concerning. It brings in, so Ireland apparently just started keeping ESG scores on their citizens. So, you know, depending on how much carbon you produce, that affects the environment part of the ESG score, and then social could be, you know, who knows what, but for corporations, it involves critical race theory. And governance, well, it sounds scary enough as it is. You don't know what governance means as a corporation or as an individual. But it seems a lot, and this sounds conspiratorial, but it sounds a lot like China's social credit system. And right now they're already in place for corporations in North America, and they're already being used on individuals in Ireland. And so the more conspiratorial part of me, which is a very large portion of me, I'll admit, but is concerned about things that impact that kind of score, like critical race theory, right? So some of these corporations, it might be a hot ticket item, but some of these corporations, it kind of looks like, for whatever reason, they're being pressured into bringing some of these social issues into their corporation in order to impact their scores, because that impacts what they're able to invest in. I don't even know if you have a comment on that. I just
No,
thought I'd
no,
bring it up.
I have a few. I didn't know the good time to interject there. I can't speak to the Ireland thing with it being used on citizens. I don't think it's acceptable for the government to keep any kind of score on you. If you break a law, that's up to the judicial system. That's that.
Yeah.
I hate our credit score system, which is
Yeah.
essentially
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. Me too.
yeah. I mean, that's not technically from the government, but it might as well be. It's in terms of its functionality. So I will never support something like that. In terms of like the corporate stuff, the details on this in my mind are a little bit hazy. I think if we were to talk about this as kind of a systemic issue, right? Long it has been the case that corporations will use these sort of arbitrary internal metrics to determine who's favored in various elements of the market. I think, like for example, we've seen this whole like pony show going on with carbon the carbon trades.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
now I am very cynical about these. I think that for the most part, corporations do one thing and they make money. That is their sole, the only thing they care about. They don't care about civil rights. They don't care about anything. Corporations can, and they have, if you look in other countries, they will work with Nazis, they will work with leftists, they will work with, well, leftists don't tend to like corporations for their own reasons, but if they can get along, they'll work with anyone, they just want to make their money. I think that when we talk about stuff like this, we're talking about a very topical way of playing social favorability politics with corporations in a way similar to what you've seen in the past with, like, I remember GM, for example, like changed their logo to green as part of their new like green initiative, and then they didn't do anything. They just changed. Yeah, right. And I'm sure their stock went up when they did that too. It wouldn't surprise me. This is just another expression of that. And the way out of this, I think, though the market will always play its own games, I think it's important to understand from both sides of the political aisle that all plays at social justice from corporations are just a way of increasing share value. That's it. That's the sole and only purpose through which they do anything. That's the only reason their shareholders would approve anything. It's if it serves that goal. Public reputation is leveraged in favor of more money in the future, infrastructural investment, reinvestment into means of production, all of it. If we can acknowledge that, we stop talking about this as wokeness taking over, or this like new nefarious Robin DiAngelo scheme, and instead refer to it, I think, what it's always been, really, which is just an eternal, ongoing PR game that they constantly play. They invent metrics for themselves to banty them about and, prioritize some over others. They love these games. It gives middle managers something to do. I don't think, real civil rights issues can be addressed by corporations. I think that at the end of the day, it has to come from us and our understanding of these problems. And I really don't think Robin DiAngelo is being brought to any of these conferences for any reason other than because the consultants who recommended her can then list it when they move over to the next corporation 2 months later and get a slightly higher pay. And if we can address it like that, which is cynical corporate banter, then I think we'd all be a lot better off for it, because I get accused of defending woke corporations, and oh god, I hate corporations. It's just, I just don't think it has anything to do really with politics outside of money making.
Okay. I don't know how I feel about that. That's probably true. Corporations are focused on making money. Yeah, of course they are. And, if this critical race theory, it's true that impacts their ability to invest, then it'd be all the more reason to push it, and then it'd be back to money in the first place.
Gets headlines too. I mean, it always gets attention, right? Like Nike's stock price skyrocketed when they did the Colin Kaepernick campaign, mostly because of just all the attention they got for it. Conservatives hated it, so if conservatives hate it, left-leaning people have to. I think they just did a promotional thing with Colin Kaepernick right after he kneeled during the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh,
there were all those people burning their Nikes and stuff, and and at the end of the day, it's a stock market bar going up while some corporate leader, the reptilian camouflage is like looking at it and smiling. I don't. It's I think very detached from the real issues at hand, outside of giving us all something to talk about, which I guess it does that.
Yeah, as if we need more to talk about right now with everything going on. Okay, do you think this critical race theory is wrapped up in other things that are from what I see, kind of also infiltrating kids at a low level, like gender studies, being taught to like kindergartners.
I don't
Or
think
those separate issues. Like right wingers would be like, the entire thing is just like woke, right? So critical race theory, gender studies. I don't know what else you'd get into there, but
the world's more progressive now than it was 20 years ago. I don't think that's a bad thing. That's just an ongoing process. There were standards being taught back in the 1930s that people in the 1910s would have been taught. I mean, that just keeps happening. With regards to the gender stuff, I mean, I don't have like a young kid, but it seems like at a lower level at least, it's fairly innocuous, you know, like a basic understanding, like sex and gender aren't the same thing. I mean, I think that's perfectly fine. It's defensible, certainly. It's a position backed up by psychiatric and biological experts in the field, so it seems like it would be fair to introduce it, especially since it's so politically topical, you know? I feel like if nobody was talking about trans people at all, like it wasn't this big, high-level political thing with senators coming out and talking about it, I feel like it probably wouldn't be discussed as much. Same with a lot of this, you know, race stuff. But given that it's so indicative of the zeitgeist of the times, it seems fair, you know? As long as they're not teaching anything exclusionary, incorrect, or offensive, I suppose. You know, like, I don't think this is happening, but, you know, like, men are worse than women because they're more mean or whatever. You know, leave that stuff out and I'm fine with it.
okay, I'm going to read something from, so the book's called Critical Race Theory, The Key Writings That Formed the Movement. And to tell you the truth, I don't know whether this is pro or anti-critical race theory or if it's neutral, but I'm going to read this and let me know what you think.
Gotcha.
Critical race theory rejects the principle of equality of opportunity. Its adherents insist that equality of opportunity is a myth, not a reality in today's America, and that those who pursue it are misguided. The real goal is equality of results, measured by Black share of income, wealth, and social standing. Critical race theorists reject the idea that sought-after goods should be distributed through systems that evaluate and reward merit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, that's definitely central to a lot of CRT writings. Though you're not going to find anything like that being taught in high schools, I'll tell you that much. Maybe somewhere, but certainly not standard. Yeah, I think that's fair. Keep in mind, before I address that, a lot of critical race theory was written directly to be provocative because it was kind of like the edgiest Harvard students, you know, and professors writing out against what is essentially the most monolithic and important legal institution on the planet, Harvard Law. I mean, that's at least it's up there, right? That's got to be really far up there. So a lot of their writings are deliberately evocative. I think their frustration was that. I'll say this. I get this all the time. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Great speech. Everyone's heard it. Oftentimes, it is cited as a kind of counterexample to what critical race theorists believe in. You know, I have a dream that we judged for the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And it's interesting to me that that would be the case because Martin Luther King in that speech was referring to the world he wanted to live in, not the world that would exist immediately after the Civil Rights Bill was passed. In fact, after the bill was passed, in a book I think entitled What Do We Do Now, Martin Luther King wrote stuff that would later be, well, inspirational to future critical race theory scholars about, for example, the essential need for reparations to address long-term harm so that it's not merely you're no longer being stabbed in the back, but you've actually patched up the wound. The need for white people to understand more significantly the nature of racism so that we can work together to combat it. A lot of that stuff, I mean, I never see it cited, but it was quite evocative, I think. When we talk about equality of opportunity, usually people do so with the implication that it exists today. But, like, and this isn't even a racial perspective. That's very not true. If you're born to a wealthy family, everything is going to be easier, on average, than if you're born to a poor family. That's not to say that individual choices and decision-making don't matter. You can fail as a wealthy person and succeed massively as a poor person. But when we're dealing with millions of people in the country, statistical averages do emerge. Race is one of those lines where it's really clear that we just don't have it, you know? Same with meritocracy, which is an idea I would like to believe in, a world I want to live in, not one that exists. The argument of the critical race theorists is that in a world with equality of opportunity, we would essentially have equality of outcome. That if there was no systemic bias, between black and white people, they would achieve essentially equal, systemic outcomes. And I think I agree with that, because the only other belief one could have is, absent any social biases, there would be something biological holding black people back, which I obviously don't believe. I don't think a lot of people believe that. But it seems like that the implication, right? I mean, if we really did have equality of opportunity, then we should be about, at least in terms of averages, on par.
Okay. Or was I going to go after that? Do you think there's any evidence that teaching people about critical race theory actually reduces racism?
By critical race theory here, we mean sort of the colloquial, what's taught in like high schools, middle schools, just the general like anti-racism thing, or the Harvard level?
Like what's being... Well, I mean, my view probably is that the Harvard level has just trickled down. And I mean, once it gets into high schools, like you said, it's not going to be the same thing that's taught in Harvard. But I still think it's probably trickled down. So whatever's being taught now, do you see that working?
In terms of fighting back against racism, individual racism is difficult to... So, educating people out of racism, I think, is about a couple of things. Making sure they live in proximity to people of other races, and making sure they don't live in proximity to people who are themselves racist. I really think those are the big kickers, If you live in a diverse community, you are monumentally less likely to have, racially inflammatory opinions, and there are tons of studies that bear that out. And of course, if your parents are, really racist, it's more likely that you're going to end up racist. I don't know how much education directly about racial issues deters it, but I do think it gives the people who aren't racist a better understanding of the issue and the tools to fight against racism. For me, at least, I would like to see a de-emphasis of individual racism. Individual racism exists, don't get me wrong. I've talked to plenty of folks who will just straight up admit they're racist, but I don't really think that's the nature of racism in this day and age. I think a lot of it comes down to really big